you hear me right now? Okay, great. Perfect. Um, cool. We'll get started. My name is Alysa McCall, and I work for Polar Bears International. I am the director of our conservation outreach programs, and I'm also a staff scientist. So I trained as a polar bear biologist at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. I started in 2010. I finished my master's degree, and then I started working for Polar Bears International. And I'm so lucky I get to do a mix of science and research and also some great educational programs and get to just chat with people and answer questions, and it's a lot of fun. So today the plan is well, to talk about polar bears, polar bear conservation, the issues they face, and a little bit about our organization as a whole. I would love to take your questions. I have some slides and some points to go over that I think are important, but I've really built in a lot of time to answer questions. So please type them in the chat box whenever you or your students think of anything. And thanks again for joining and for being interested in this today. It's a lot of fun for me to talk about polar bears. And just so you know, so Polar Bears International, we do work around the world. We have a team heading to Norway right now. We do work out of Alaska. We're often in Churchill, Manitoba, Canada for the polar bear season in the fall. And our main head office is actually in Montana, but we also have people kind of spread out. And so I myself right now, I'm living in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, Canada. So when I'm not on the road or traveling or in Churchill, I work from home. And so this is just me sitting in my home right now. I've got two cats around if you hear anything in the background. Sorry about that. But it's great. I'm very lucky and fortunate and really happy to talk to you about polar bears today. So I was just going to start with what is a polar bear? So what makes a polar bear a polar bear? Why is it special? So I'm going to fast forward. Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Well, polar bears are really special. I think they're really iconic. Most people, when you say polar bear, they immediately get a vision of this great white bear out on the ice. In fact, in many parts of the world, they're called an ice bear um, because they need ice. So polar bears evolved from their brown bear ancestor at least 150,000 years ago. We're not 100% sure when exactly the split took place because it's quite complicated. They're still able to mate with brown bears. There are some populations of brown bears that are actually more related to polar bears because they've bred more often in history. But polar bears did split from this ancestor to take advantage of the sea ice ecosystem. So brown bears are a terrestrial animal. They eat terrestrial foods. They eat fish, berries, things that you find on land. Polar bears split because they were able to take advantage of a different niche, and they learned that by going out on the sea ice, as the first ancestors went out on the sea ice, and they were able to take advantage of seals and marine prey. And so the polar bear has really evolved to be this ice bear and to need marine prey in the form of mostly seals. And in fact, they've got many, many adaptations that make them the ice bear. So first of all, you can kind of compare their faces here, and they're very different. So you can see that the brown bear, its nose and face almost has a very shallow scoop to it. It's kind of upturned a little bit. Brown bears will dig under logs and on land to find food and forage a little bit. Polar bears have we call it a Roman nose, very beautiful kind of curved face. And their faces and necks are quite long. And this is really an adaptation to get into seal holes. So the classic form of hunting for polar bears is to sit at a seal hole. It's called still hunting, and just be very, very patient. So seals, of course, live underwater but need to breathe air. And seals will maintain breathing holes. So each seal will have, say, 5 breathing holes that they'll maintain with their claws on the flipper. So they'll keep these holes open. Polar bears find a hole and know eventually a seal has to come up to breathe. And so they'll wait patiently, a seal pops up, and the polar bear can dive in through that hole and grab that seal. Now they've got other things to help them, of course. They've got, let me click through, what do they have? So to keep warm, first of all, when they're out on that ice, it's very, very cold. They live in some of the coldest conditions on the planet. So they have to keep warm. They've got very, very thick fur. Polar bears actually have 2 layers of fur. So if you were to dig down into polar bear fur, they have a really thick downy layer right against the body, and this is almost like a sweater. And then you can see these larger hairs, longer hairs over top, more like a guard hair, and these are kind of like a rain jacket, so they're more water repellent. Um, and so it's like the bear is wearing a sweater and a rain jacket. It's got these couple layers to keep it warm and dry. Very, very warm fur. Polar bears also, of course, have a very thick layer of fat. They've got several inches of fat. In fact, some bears get very, very fat if they can. And pregnant female polar bears get hugely fat. And that polar bears want to be fat. They actually have special genetics that scientists are studying to understand why polar bears can be fat and not have health issues and humans can't, for example. Polar bears have different genes when it comes to processing fat and being fat than brown bears. That's one of their adaptations. In fact, polar bears have this amazing conversion rate of fat. So it's around 90% or so of the fat that they eat goes directly onto their body, which is just astounding. It's very efficient. If 90% of the fat that we ate went directly onto our bodies, humans would be in trouble. But for a polar bear, it's a really great thing. Polar bears really, when there's a lot of food around, so for example, during the spring when seals are pupping and there's a lot of seals out there and they're having their babies, there's more food, polar bears enter a state that we call hyperphagia. So Phagia, hyperphagia. And this means that they're eating a lot when they can. They have to take advantage because there will be other times in the year where there's almost no food. So when there is food, they have to eat a lot. And when there's a lot of food, they really only eat fat. They will catch a seal, strip it of its blubber, eat the fat, and leave. They won't even eat the meat if they don't have to, if they can go on to something else. So they're really fat-eating animals. They're highly, highly specialized. Some people even kind of casually refer to them as lipivores instead of carnivores. They are the most carnivorous of all bears, but really it's not even the meat they want, it's the fat. You'd have a really happy polar bear if they could just eat fat all day. And so eating fat, again, they digest it better than anything else. They don't digest carbohydrates and proteins as well as they digest fats, which is much different from the brown bear. So these two bears have very different diets. And of course, yeah, the polar bear can keep nice and fat and keep warm. And fat is also really good for buoyancy. So polar bears do have to swim. And in fact, they're swimming now more often in some places than they have and for longer distances. But having this really fat body helps them be able to go longer swimming. They're more buoyant in the water, which is very, very helpful for them. So another great adaptation to the sea ice and their environment is their feet and claws. So polar bears have very big feet. They can be over 12 inches, so size of a dinner plate, much bigger than my head, especially on those large adult males. And this helps them in a few ways. So they spread their weight out over the sea ice more efficiently that way, so they don't break through as much. In fact, polar bears that are heavier than us can walk across ice that is thinner than we could, which is pretty cool. The bottom of polar bears' feet are also kind of like winter tires. They have a tread on them almost, and that helps them be a little sticky on the sea ice, which is cool. And they have scent glands in their feet. So male polar bears can sniff a female's footprints, find out if maybe she's ready to mate by her scent, and they'll follow the footprints on the ice for a really long time, which is really neat stuff. And of course, they have the really sharp claws. So polar bears have these claws. They, again, help with tread into the ice somewhat, helps them not slip. And of course, they are great for hunting seals because they can really get into the seal and pull them up. Brown bear claws are much longer and thinner and more used for digging, whereas these are really used for seal grabbing. So great, I'm seeing some questions come in. That's awesome. How much do polar bears eat each day? Great question, and it totally depends on the day and where the polar bear lives. So some populations have different kind of food situations than others. The population I've studied the most is called the Western Hudson Bay population, which is in Western Hudson Bay in Canada. and around the Manitoba-Churchill area. There are 19 populations around the world, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But depending on where the bears are, it depends on how much they can eat at different times of the year. Polar bears can go a good amount of time without eating. So for many days, they might not eat anything. And then again, during that springtime, they might eat a ton. So a rough calculation of how much polar bears need to eat every day is about one ringed seal. So a seal that's about 100 to 150 pounds, roughly one a week it works out to that polar bears would need to keep going. And that's kind of a rough estimate. Actually, female polar bears that are pregnant in the Hudson Bay area, they are incredible. So these females, they will mate in the spring, and then they'll come onto land in the summer when all the ice in Hudson Bay melts, and then they'll go into their dens in the fall, and they'll give birth in the winter, and they won't emerge again until around now, till about March, really. And so females in Hudson Bay go up to 8 months without eating anything, which is just crazy. So before they get pregnant, they have to get very, very, very fat because they're only living on their body fat for a very long time. It's quite the life. But yeah, roughly about a seal a week, more if they could. I mean, polar bears are bears, they love to eat. We can talk a little bit too about other things they eat, but really it comes down to seals. When we do see them on land, they still try to forage, so they're eating seaweed and berries, eggs, kind of whatever they find. But there's no terrestrial food source on land that gives polar bears enough calories to sustain them long term. A few polar bears over a short period of time, they might be able to make use of the calories on land, but the places that polar bears come onto shore, so the tundra areas and places like that, are very food scarce. And even the brown bears in that area that actually do eat that food are some of the smallest brown bears in the world, the tundra grizzlies. And so polar bears really do need that seal fat. Were polar bears actually brown? Yeah, well, neat question. I mean, at some point they were. There would have been this transition period when slowly the white polar bear was selected for because seals had a harder time seeing them on the ice. So polar bears, of course, they look white. They've got that camouflage. It's harder for a seal to spot them. And so that trait, the white, was selected for over time. And so there would have been a time where polar bears are maybe in an in-between. There are still occasionally a hybrid that we see arise in certain parts of Canada between a grizzly and a polar bear, and they're kind of like almost a cream color, mostly white, but they're almost like a dirty white. And polar bears actually, so really they're not even white. Their fur is clear. It's hollow and clear, so colorless, and it just looks white to our eyes. But because it's clear and hollow, um, you can really see other colors in the environment on the polar bear, which sounds kind of weird. But so for example, when the sun is setting in the evening, polar bears really pick up the colors in the sky, and they look like they are pink bears or yellow bears or orange bears, and it's really quite beautiful. But also they get really dirty. So when we're in Churchill and the bears have been on land all summer and they're waiting to get back on the sea ice in the fall when the sea ice freezes up again, they've been on land for 4 months or so, and sometimes we see pretty dirty bears that aren't looking so clean and white. So really, they can vary, but naturally they will look white to our eyes, which is pretty neat. So I'm just reading some of potato chip colored. Oh, I like that. Potato chip colored polar bear. Yeah, I like that a lot. I'm gonna remember that. That's a great comment. Thank you for that. So we're getting some questions about conservation, which is just wonderful. And I'm gonna get to that really quick. I'm just gonna do a few more things about polar bear biology, and then let's definitely talk about conservation. And I do have hope, absolutely. I'm gonna tell you why I have hope. And then we'll talk about what people are doing for polar bear conservation, because it's a really interesting conservation issue. As a conservation biologist, it's not your kind of classic issue. So are male or females more aggressive? Overall, males are definitely more aggressive, and I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. So here's some male bears here. Oh shoot. I'm going to fast forward. I can come back through some of these. There's the really sharp teeth, of course. They have the huge canines for grabbing seals. There's some seals. We have a ring seal on the lower right and a bearded seal, the bigger guy hanging out on the ice, and the ring seal popping through the seal hole there. Mom and cubs, can come back to them. Really neat stuff. Okay, so here we've got some big boys here. So male polar bears in the spring are the most aggressive. So female polar bears are about 300 to 600 pounds. When they're pregnant, they'll gain a lot more weight than that. And male polar bears are about double the size of female polar bears. So we call this dimorphic, which means two sizes. So when you have a species that's dimorphic, we would see the males being much, much bigger than the females. And the males have to be so much bigger because they fight over the females. So females only breed about every 3 years because otherwise they're taking care of their cubs. And the bears live in this huge environment, and it can be hard to track down a female, especially one that wants to breed with you. And so when males do find a female, they need to defend their girlfriend basically for a couple weeks. And so we see the older males, they get a lot of the scars. You can see the picture in the middle here. He's got a very scarred up face. His polar bears will fight quite aggressively. Female polar bears absolutely can be aggressive and can fight when they're protecting their cubs especially. But it's really the males that are the bruisers. And males live into about their early 20s or so, and females can live into their late 20s. And part of the reason for the different lifespans is that male polar bears have to fight so much more than the females. In the fall, so the picture on the left here we call sparring. In the spring, this would be very aggressive, but what we actually are seeing in this photo is more play fighting. So in the Churchill region, in the fall, when the bears are waiting and they're kind of bored, we see them do this sparring and play fighting, and it's really neat to watch. It's almost like they're practicing or sizing each other up. We often see more of the younger males go for it. And yeah, it's kind of just a play thing and figuring out where they stand, what their skills are like. It's a really special thing to watch. So we've got a question, is there a name for the hybrid of the polar bear and grizzly bear? Yeah, great question. So when we talk about hybrids, we put the dad's name first when we're combining a name. And so far, the hybrids we know of have all been a grizzly father and a female polar bear mother. And so we call them growler bears. So grizzly first, then polar, so growler bears. If we had a polar bear father, grizzly mother, we might call them pizzly bears or something like that. But so far, growler bears. So the maximum weight, the biggest polar bear we've ever found was a male, and he was just over 2,000 pounds, and I believe that was up in Alaska, but we usually don't see them quite that big. A large adult male in Churchill area that we would get would be 1,400 pounds sort of thing. That would be a really big adult male. And when the newborn cubs are born, they're so little. They're just 1 to 2 pounds each. So the female's in her den, and it's not a super large area, and she doesn't have, of course, any support. She's just by herself, and so by having her babies be so small, it's much safer for mom. So she gives birth to just these tiny, tiny little cubs, and then she nurses them. And polar bear milk is the fattiest milk of a mammal that you can find on land. So it's about 33% milk fat, which is like us drinking whipping cream. And this means that the cubs get a ton of calories and a ton of fat, and they grow super, super quickly. And so within just a couple months, the little cubs can be 20 pounds or so. And then at a year old, they could be 100 pounds. So during the early years of a polar bear's life, they really grow quite quickly. And the little cubs have to grow quickly because as soon as possible, they need to be able to follow mom out on that sea ice. So you can see really young cubs on the right and a little older on the left. They're so small when they're born, but mom, again, hasn't eaten for maybe 8 months, and so she needs to go eat soon, but she needs to make sure her cubs are ready to go before she starts that journey back to the ice. And so they need to be tough and strong enough, and she'll take good care of them and teach them how to be little polar bears. But I'm sure it's a little scary as a cub. And we do see many cubs don't make it to adulthood. It depends on the year and the environment of what the mortality rate is. But to me, it's amazing that as many make it to adulthood that do right now, because it's a very tough life out there. As for the hybrids, so I know this is always such a cool subject for people. People love talking about the hybrids. I totally get it. But to be honest, we don't know a lot about them right now. There's only a couple documented cases that were almost accidentally documented. We don't have a lot of great research on them. We haven't really been able to monitor what they're doing. out there. We know they are fertile, so they can breed, which isn't always the case with hybrids. Some hybrid animals from certain species can't reproduce, but growler bears can reproduce. Um, they're a little bit weird though, as far as we know. So the cubs have been raised by polar bear mother, so that's kind of how they've learned to hunt. But we have seen hybrids then, when they've left their mother, kind of make more of a living on land. So we haven't done the whole genetics and what their digestive system has adapted for. Um, they kind of have these weird paws. So polar bear paws are quite furred over the whole bottom to keep them warm, and of course grizzly paws are not. And the hybrids kind of have a almost a halfer situation going on. And they're kind of a weird blocky looking head. It's not quite grizzly, not quite polar. So again, we don't really know. There's some interesting observations, and I'm sure we'll learn more. We don't really expect hybrids to become a lot more common. Again, they've only been found in mostly a certain area in the north. Um, we'll just kind of keep our eye on what's going on, and if we see more, and they're not going to become their own species, that's not what we expect to happen. They're kind of just almost an accident, which things happen in nature. Coyotes and wolves mate as well sometimes, so it's just kind of a neat phenomenon to keep an eye on. Yeah, great questions about more mums and cubs, which is wonderful. So mums will, when they give birth, they have their cubs with them for about 2.5 years. So in the first year, we call cubs cubs of the year, or coys for short. In the cub's second year, they're called yearlings. And then when the cub is almost 2.5, it usually gets weaned, and then mom will mate again. So she only mates about every 3 years. And between the time when a cub is weaned and when it turns 5, those are called subadult bears. So they're almost like the teenagers of bears. They're kind of on their own for the first time. They're not really ready to reproduce yet. It's almost the toughest time in a bear's life, when they're first on their own and kind of have to figure out how to hunt for themselves before they become breeders, basically. So females can start having cubs about age 5 or 6, and males usually aren't very successful at breeding until they're in their teens. And again, this is because they have to fight other males usually, and you have to be pretty big and strong to do that successfully. So we see most males breeding around the age of 15 or 16. And females will have about 1 to 3 cubs. We used to see triplets more often. We don't see them as much anymore. 1 to 2 is kind of the norm. Usually if it's a single cub, it'll be bigger, because it's getting all mom's resources. And we have seen, so we've seen identical twins be born, also fraternal twins, and cubs born at the same time can have different fathers, which is pretty interesting. And there's actually at least 6 documented cases of adoption. So moms adopting other female cubs. So we assume this happens maybe when something happens to the other mom, or maybe a mix-up. But polar bears are pretty good about knowing who their own cubs are, so we're sure it's not totally accidental. Something's going on there. So that's pretty incredible. Um, Zane wants to know if there are animals that prey on the polar bear. Yeah, good question. So let me see what I have. Can I have that slide? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna flip through some slides again. I want to show you a quick food chain slide, and then I can come back to anything you see here. I'm gonna talk about that. Okay, so this is very basic food chain in the Arctic, of course, very, very basic. But you see algae grows in the sea ice itself. So sea ice isn't just a platform, it's not just ice. Sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. It's really forming the base of the food chain. So algae feeds all these microorganisms, feed the fish, feed the seals, feed the polar bear, which is pretty cool. So polar bears are at the top of the food chain. Now, cannibalism occasionally happens. It is usually in desperate situations. Polar bears really, really hungry, but they will eat each other rarely. It happens rarely. And then people are really the polar bear's only predator. So there are certain cultures that do still hunt the polar bear. It's been part of their culture for thousands of years, and that's a protected right. And they do it, carefully, only a certain number, and that is something we support, as long as it's all documented and we know how many polar bears are being hunted a year. But really, most of the time, polar bears are out there and they don't have to worry about much. They are at the top of the food chain. Can polar bears be domesticated? Oh, that's so funny. I got that question yesterday. Not Not successfully, really. So polar bears, they are in zoos around the world, and they can be trained really well. They're highly intelligent animals that can bond with their keepers and other animals. They're so smart. Um, I don't know if you can ever really truly domesticate a bear. You shouldn't. You shouldn't try it. It's not worth it. It's not legal. Back in, there have been cases where people have kept pet polar bears. In fact, I think was it King Henry, at the Tower of London in the 1200s. I think he was gifted a polar bear, and they would take the polar bear swimming in the Thames River for fish, hunting for fish. And it's just, I wouldn't want to pet polar bears as much as I love polar bears. Also in Churchill, in the mid 1900s, there was a lot of military activity, and so there were more polar bears getting shot that were around. Um, we don't really know how many were around, but it was a little different back then, and so there were cases of cubs being abandoned or available, and people trying to adopt the cubs for short periods of time, and it never really ended that well. They grow so fast, and they're bears. So we want to keep the bears in the wild or in a really great zoo environment, and we don't want to try to domesticate them because I don't think bears really like that sort of thing anyway. Can humans get close to polar bears without getting attacked? Yes, that happens a lot. So polar bears really, they're not the man hunter that they're portrayed as often. So the question about polar bear aggression earlier was a really great question, but polar bears are generally much less aggressive than brown bears. I would much rather accidentally run into a polar bear in the wild than a grizzly bear. But that's not to say I want to run into either. So there's many cases, I mean, depending on the time of year, humans can get near polar bears without the polar bear wanting to attack or anything. But that's not a situation we encourage anyone to put themselves in. We are always promoting bear safety. So whenever we go anywhere in polar bear country, we're very aware of our surroundings. If we see a bear, we do not approach. We, in fact, back away. We've always got bear spray. Um, you don't need to be super worried about polar bears attacking, but you also don't want to put anyone in a situation where it's even a probability. It's just not good for humans or polar bears. So yeah, just don't go near polar bears, and they're happy and we're happy, and that's great. So when we go to Churchill, when we want to view polar bears, we go in what we call a tundra buggy. So we're in a large vehicle. It's very high up off the ground. We don't have any smells for the polar bears. We don't feed them. They just kind of see us in vehicles that look weird and are really big and far away from them. They do get close, but we're not like face to face. So it's much safer, and we don't want to put any bears or people in a weird situation there. Is a polar bear or brown bear stronger? That's a really good question. Polar bears actually have less bite strength than brown bears. So because the polar bear diet is much softer with the fat, and grizzly bears need to eat more roughage, so twigs and things like that. Polar bears have less strength in their bite, and again, they're less aggressive. So we have seen cases where a smaller brown bear will push off a bigger polar bear off of food. Um, if I had to bet, I might say brown bear, but really they're both very strong animals, very strong, much stronger than people anyway. And how long can they stay underwater? Cool question. So the longest a polar bear has ever been documented swimming underwater in the wild has been 3 minutes and 10 seconds. And that was a very hungry polar bear in Norway that was actually diving to the bottom of the seabed to get seaweed. He was quite hungry, a very thin guy who wasn't having much success with seals, and so he was staying underwater longer and kind of pushing that. So over 3 minutes, which is pretty substantial. We don't see that too often. They don't really want to hold their breath that long, but that's a good amount of time underwater. So yeah, let's talk maybe a little bit about some polar bear conservation. Polar bears do have black skin. I cannot explain it because we don't really know why, but they do have black skin. It's been postulated that it helps keep warmth in better, it absorbs more warmth, but we don't really know. It's kind of just a neat trivia thing about polar bears. So I'm going to talk a little bit about field research, and as for zoos being a good way for people to experience polar bears, I think they can be. I think most people are not going to get the experience of seeing polar bears in the wild. And if they're able to go to a good zoo that takes good care of their polar bears and good zoos take really good care of their polar bears. I think it's a neat way to form a connection with the animal and kind of see the beauty in person. And if that animal can then be almost a spokesperson for their wild cousins and inspire people to help the wild population, I think it can be a positive thing. We do work at Polar Bears International. We do work with zoos, and we zoos that we work closely with and have good relationships with, we call them our Arctic Ambassador Centers, and they are meant to be ambassadors for the Arctic. So all over the world in places that even don't get cold, that don't even have polar bears, some do. We ask them to really be talking about the Arctic and about climate change and about conservation issues. And zoos get more visitors every year combined than all the sporting events in America, which is a huge amount of people. And so we do want to use that opportunity when people are interested in animals and want to come to the zoo to see the animal, to make sure we're giving them good information and helping inspire them to help the wild animals. So we do think that that's really great. And polar bears occasionally will eat a walrus, but walruses are massive and really hard to catch. So polar bears more likely to catch a walrus if it's smaller or injured or kind of washed up on shore. But yes, they absolutely will snack on a walrus if they get the chance, because walrus have a lot of fat, as I'm sure you know. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about research. And then we'll kind of go into some wild conservation stuff. So again, there's populations around the world. The best studied population in the world is Western Hudson Bay because the polar bears are so accessible there. They're closer. We can get hands-on with them more cheaply. It's less expensive. Polar bear research is so expensive. We need helicopter time, and getting out into the field and into the north is very, very pricey. But when we do study polar bears, there's a few things we do. So you have to go in the helicopter because they're really spread out, they're far away. When we see a polar bear, we do tranquilize it with the dart gun, and the tranquilizer lasts for a couple hours, usually an hour. The bear's coming out of it in an hour, and they're back to normal pretty soon after that. And that just keeps it safe for the bears and people. It's a very well-tested tranquilizer. That just allows us to work on the bear. So one of the things we do is we do give it a little ear tag there. So you can see it's white. And does this guy have, so I'm just going to try to see if any of these guys have ear tags. Maybe not, but they're hard to see in the polar bear. And the ear tag will have a number on it. So each individual polar bear that gets studied has its own individual number, and it stays with that bear forever. And that way we can keep track of bears. So if we capture that bear in the future, we know who it is and we know its history. And some bears have helped us get this really great history. And so we can see how their weights change, where they've moved, the ages in the population. We can age a polar bear we can pop a very small tooth out that's left over from the brown bear ancestor that the polar bear doesn't need anymore. It's just really tiny. And if we cut that tooth in half, we can count rings on it like rings of a tree, which is pretty neat stuff. So that's how we age a polar bear. We only ever need to do that once, and then we can extrapolate its age. So we can figure out its age from the first time we cut its tooth. This data set has allowed us to actually understand polar bears. So in Western Hudson Bay, we've been studying them since the 1980s. So we have this almost 40-year data set now, and it's only because of data that we get from science and collecting information and then looking at it over long periods of time. That's the best and really the only way to really learn what we need to know about polar bears to help them in the wild. And it's been really incredible what we've learned. We've been able to link body changes with sea ice changes, because basically it comes down to less calories, which I'll talk about in a minute. But when there's less sea ice, polar bears simply don't hunt as much. They get fewer seals, and that leads to fewer calories and changes in the population. So something we can also do is track polar bears with collars or even radio ear tags. And so this is a picture of a mom with a collar. And this data gives us information that would be impossible otherwise. So these bears will walk out on the sea ice and live their lives normally, and we can collect the movement from a satellite. So I can click on my computer, get the latest locations, and map out where these polar bears are going. And that's what most of my research did. So they're out in places humans can't even get to, but we can still know what they're doing, and we can compare where the polar bears are with what type of sea ice they're using, and all these other things going on, so we can really understand what they're doing and why, And it's just so important for us to conserve any animal to understand things like that. So the research has been just really important. There's different ways we can do research. We can even collect hair from hair snags that we put around. Polar bear hair has hormones in it, so we can see if there's stress hormones in it, or if there's even pollutants in their hair, and we can kind of understand what's going on with their bodies. And by comparing populations around the world, we get a better sense of what's going on in different parts of the world with polar bears. Some populations are still doing fine, some are in decline, some are doing pretty well depending on what the ice and seals are doing. And so there's just really all these questions to ask. There's just so many people working on so many cool questions. And if you're interested, you can too, because there's always room for more scientists. And then, of course, this is just a picture of a polar bear on land in the fall. You can see he's got a couple scars on his nose. Um, we called this guy Four Eyes. I think we saw him one fall in Churchill. And yeah, this is just what they look like on land when they're waiting for the sea ice to come in. So this is what allows us in Churchill to get close to the bears and study them better, because there's really few places on Earth that so many polar bears come to a small area like this. So it's pretty neat stuff. And then here's a map here. So this is the 19 different polar bear management units. Canada has 13 of the world's polar bear population, so 2/3 of the world's polar bears live in Canada. Alaska co-manages a couple populations, and then we have populations in Greenland, Norway, and Russia as well. And all these countries work together to talk about what they're doing for polar bear conservation. They got together in the 1970s to actually plan for conservation and management. And so people compare notes, they talk, we reassess populations when possible, yeah, they cover a lot of area. And most of the area they cover, you'll maybe notice, it's only areas that have sea ice and seals. So there's not so many polar bears at the North Pole because it's not very productive up there in the water. It's too dark. There's not a lot of seals. And so we really see more polar bears where there's more seals to eat, which really makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about polar bear conservation. And so there are about 25, 26, maybe up to 30,000 polar bears still in the world, which sounds pretty good. So why are we worried about polar bears? Like, why are we talking about this when there's other animals that are more close to endangered or more threatened? Right now, polar bears are more threatened than grizzly bears. In fact, grizzly bears in many parts are doing well. Threatened than grizzly bears. In fact, grizzly bears in many parts are doing well. And so what's the problem? What do they make their homes out of? Well, usually polar bears are just out and about. If they want to make a snow bed, they will. They will den in the ice or the snow, but they can also dig dens in areas around Hudson Bay in the peat, so in the earth. And we will see them often along riverbanks. We'll see a bunch of polar bear dens kind of dug into the side of a river in certain areas. It again depends where the polar bear lives. Let me see if I missed any questions. Okay, perfect. So, when polar bears fight, usually polar bears just fight until one backs down. They don't tend to fight to the death. Usually it's not worth it for a polar bear to actually die just for one mating event. And so usually they figure out pretty quickly who's the dominant male and the other one backs off. It's more efficient that way. And the biggest males would be in their late teens. So I would say around 17 or 18 or so. And then Churchill is here. I'm going to go back to the map and then we'll talk. So Churchill, oh, can you guys see my cursor? I'm not sure. But if you see the Canada and then the Western Hudson Bay WH population, which is one of the most southern, a little bit to the left. So the big WH, there's a little shelf in there, Churchill, Manitoba. It's right on the coast of Hudson Bay. I'm sorry I don't have a map more zoomed in, but I might screen share here in a minute. I can pull something up. But that's where Churchill is. So it's pretty far south and pretty, I mean, fairly easy to get to compared to a lot of other populations. All right, conservation. Why are we worried about polar bears? Well, okay, so polar bears, like I've been explaining, they need sea ice. And sea ice is a really special environment. It's not something humans have a lot of direct control over. And what I mean by that is that, well, okay, for example, a forest. If we have a forest that we want to conserve, there's some things we can do. We can plant more trees, or we could put a fence around the forest to stop people from getting in and hurting it. or we could even hire somebody to monitor the forest and make sure no one's poaching or anything like that. Same with the grassland. We can plant more grass. We can move where the cows are grazing. We can keep out deer. We can do different things for terrestrial environments. But for sea ice, we can't put a fence around it. We can't grow more of it when we need it. We can't directly get it back or protect it when we want to. For sea ice, we need to be proactive and we need to do bigger worldwide changes to keep it. And it is so important, not just for polar bears. It's important for people. Sea ice, well, like I said, it's like the soil is to a forest. It forms the base of the food chain. And sea ice is also like the planet's air conditioner. So it reflects sunlight away and it prevents sunlight from being absorbed into the ocean. And this has a cooling effect on the entire planet. So the more we lose sea ice, the more light and warmth we're absorbing into the world and the warmer it gets. And so sea ice is so important for so many reasons, and that's why we're talking about it now, because sea ice is declining. And the reason it's declining is because we are releasing too many emissions. So the Earth's atmosphere is like a heat trapping blanket. It keeps Earth warm when there's regular amounts of greenhouse gas emissions around the world. But what has happened is that humans, so this is normal. Normally, we trap a normal amount of heat because there's just regular emissions in the atmosphere. But humans learned how to use fossil fuels, so that's coal, oil, gas, and we burn those fossil fuels for our vehicles and for heating our homes and for doing all these kind of basic activities. We've been using fossil fuels. Now, when we burn those, we release emissions, specifically carbon dioxide and carbon emissions, into the atmosphere, and they get trapped. And these emissions, they trap a lot of heat. And so basically, we're thickening Earth's heat trapping blanket. We're thickening our atmosphere. We're trapping more heat. It just can't escape anymore. And so what we've done is we've really thickened this dense atmosphere around Earth, and we're just absorbing too much heat. And just like your glass, your drink with ice in the summer melts, when it gets warmer, ice melts, and I think we all know that. And getting back to this food chain, I mean, sea ice is so critically important for everything. And what we're seeing is this happen. So usually we get sea ice reflecting sunlight away, but as Earth is warming because of these emissions building up in our atmosphere, we are getting more and more warmth and our sea ice is declining. And we are currently just breaking records for sea ice loss. And so this last winter has been the lowest sea ice we've seen since we've been recording sea ice. We've seen this downward trend in the last 30 years of sea ice loss all over the world. And it's scary because we need to reverse the trend. And again, we can't just snap our fingers and reverse the trend. We need to all work together. And so there's so many things we can all do to help this. A big thing is getting involved for polar bears and for people. We can get our elected officials. We can tell them how important it is to us. We can become elected officials. We can make sure the environment is a priority. Make sure that switching to different energies is a priority for people, and that's already happening across the world. Solar and wind are much cleaner. We can transition away from fossil fuels. We can slow and stop all these emissions we're releasing, and we can cap the rising temperatures on the planet and keep sea ice. And we know that sea ice rebounds quickly. So if we can change how many emissions we're releasing and we can change that trend, we can get sea ice back. It will come back. We've shown that through many models. And so some of the conservation that we're doing, we do some just practical things for short term, but long term, what we're doing is we try to talk to people about the importance of protecting the climate and the planet for everyone, not just polar bears, and getting involved in your communities as much as you can. So joining carpools or promoting your local farmers market, or just all these things that are really good for the environment. Any of that's good for polar bears. It's not a direct conservation issue. We call it slow conservation. So we can't go just plant more sea ice. It's going to take a slower approach, and that's why we're starting now when we still have 26,000 polar bears, because we have seen populations decline already. Some populations have declined in areas where we've lost too much sea ice, and we know that will continue if we don't do anything. And so that's why we talk about it now, because there's so many great young people out there. We really can see the tides turning and people wanting to get involved and realizing how important this planet is for everyone. And as for why are polar bears useful to humans? Well, they're really useful and culturally critically important for many northern cultures. Inuit, um, it's such a big part of their life. For the average, American or Australian, polar bears aren't going to have a direct impact on your own life, to be honest. But I think the idea of having this animal in the wild that's so beautiful and just trying to live its life in this incredible lifestyle and being part of the biodiversity of our planet, we think it's just the responsible thing to do to protect these resources and these animals for future generations. It's just kind of what we should be doing as citizens of the planet that have the power to change something. And so I would really encourage you, you know, no matter what field you're interested in or where you go with your life, to just think about kind of what's good for you, your health, the health of the planet, and polar bears as part of that. So it's really great for me that people are interested in learning about polar bears. And so I am going to screen share really quickly and hope that this works. So bear with me. Let me see, is it working? Okay, I'm just going to show you a couple cool websites. It's just connecting. I'll show you our website. There we go. All right, and a couple others. Let me see if you're seeing this right now. Yeah, okay. Hopefully you see this. Hopefully. Okay. This is the National Snow and Ice Data Center. And so if you're ever interested in seeing what the sea ice is doing, you can just Google Arctic Sea Ice News, and they have daily updates of different images about what the sea ice is doing and different graphs and maps and summaries. So I think it's really cool. Sea ice might not be everyone's thing, but I think it's super cool. And you can see that our Arctic sea ice extent right now is lower than it's been before. So I encourage you to check that out with your teachers in your class. We also have the PBSG, so that stands for the Polar Bear Specialist Group. And this is the group comprised of people from all the polar bear countries that get together and talk about polar bear conservation. And so to be fair, this website does need to be updated, and it will be soon because there was just another election for the PBSG. But this is such a cool tool you can go to. You can go to the population map, and you can see all the different populations of polar bears. And if you put your cursor over a population, it will tell you what the population is and what its status is. And there's just lots of cool information about polar bears here from the official sources and people that are studying them. So that's pretty neat. And then I want to show you a few things that Polar Bear International has if you're interested. So our website here, new website, you can take the journey of hope, and we are very hopeful. We see just people that are so engaged and interested in polar bears, understanding climate change and how really it's not, we know what the problem is and we know how to fix it, and so we just need to move together as a society down that path of fixing what we have wrong. So you'll see we've got all sorts of neat videos, we've got information, different ways you can get involved. We also have some research, so you can see what research projects we do. So I kind of mentioned we talk about climate change and promoting education and things like that, but we also have more on the ground research. So we've got projects in Alaska and Norway that are studying moms and cubs that are emerging from their dens. We also have some human polar bear conflict work. And so a priority for us is reducing the amount of polar bears that are coming into conflict with towns. And we expect that will become more of a problem in the future. As sea ice continues to melt, polar bears are going to spend more time on land. And we've seen in places where this has already happened that when polar bears come on land, they smell good things, they come into contact with more people, and that's not good for people or polar bears. So we have some, we train people to be polar bear guards. We're supporting some pilot projects to detect polar bears before they come into town, and so people can scare them away before they get close. And so we've got a bunch of different research projects. I encourage you to check it out if you're interested. And then we also have a polar bear tracker. So some of that color data I was telling you about, we actually map it out if you're interested. You can see what all these different polar bears are doing. These are all females. We've got the southern Hudson Bay population, the western Hudson Bay population. You can see that polar bears, they do different things. They're really, really interesting to watch. So this will, it's updated usually about once a week. There's a couple kinks with this new website right now we're working on, but we're really hopeful it'll be all great and fixed soon. So you can see Churchill's right here. Actually, that's a good place. Anyway, yeah, Churchill's here. And then down here we get to Ontario and the Polar Bear Provincial Park. Anyway, I'll leave that to you. It's pretty neat though, if you're interested in checking it out. We also have some tools for teachers, like little curriculum things if you're interested in using that in class. And we also have the Polar Bear Live Cam. So this is on explore.org. Explore.org is an amazing organization. They've got wildlife cams around the world. And so this is just a highlight right now, but they've got some great highlights. So in the fall, when Polar Bears International is in Churchill, we are streaming live what the polar bears are doing. We have 5 cameras set up around the tundra, and we get great footage of polar bears, and we talk about polar bears, and we answer questions all fall. So October, November, every year, this is where we are. And explore.org is streaming it on their website. So whenever you're interested, I would totally encourage you to check it out. This one right now, let me get right here. So this one is live. This is on Cape Churchill. So you're probably not going to see many polar bears, but you can see what it looks like right now out on the sea ice and in Churchill on the tundra. So that's a pretty incredible tool to kind of see what is out there. Yeah, so take a look. I would encourage anyone to check out all these tools and more. You can also contact us on our website if you have any questions, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. And so one last thing I want to tell you about is that this is such great timing because Monday is International Polar Bear Day on February 27th, which is just super cool. And so if you guys are interested in tuning in on Polar Bear Day, we've got a whole schedule of events we're doing. On our Facebook page, we're live streaming events on the hour every hour. We have all sorts of social media stuff. If you check out Twitter, we've got hashtags Polar Bear Day, we've got videos, and we are asking people to take the thermostat challenge. And so the thermostat challenge is just asking you in your homes or at school or in your office, talk to your parents, to turn down your thermostat by 1 to 2 degrees, and just a little bit will save a lot of energy and save some fuel perhaps. And we're asking people to bundle up. So put on a scarf or a sweater instead, stay a little warmer and stay cozy, and take the challenge. Let us know what you do for the challenge. We'd love to highlight you on social media. And we're also asking people just to pledge to do get involved in their community and take action in their community. However, whether it's in your school or whatever you can do, just knowing that people are fighting for action on climate is wonderful. So thank you so much. And I see, yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, people are starting to have to go, of course, because it's almost at the hour. So I am more than happy to stick around for a few more minutes, even while people are getting off, just to answer any more questions. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in today and asking your questions about polar bears and climate change. We are really hopeful and positive that we're going to keep polar bears around for a very, very long time. We think we will change. We think people will change. So if nothing changes, we could lose polar bears by the end of the century, but we don't want that to happen. We want everyone to work together because, again, it's not just about polar bears. It's also about people. People live in the north. People need sea ice, and so we all want to, work together. So what was my college? Yeah, so what did I study? So people that study polar bears, I know people from all sorts of different backgrounds. So you can really help and work with polar bears coming from a lot of angles. For myself, when I went to university as an undergraduate, I majored in animal biology, so I wanted to be a wildlife biologist. And so I took a lot of zoology courses, but I also took a lot of writing courses and communication courses. You need stats and math and all that, but it's so rewarding. And for 5 years, I studied deer mice, so little mice in the field. I radio tracked them too and measured them and tagged them. And then I studied toads for a year, and I just loved animals. And it was kind of just a happy accident that I got to study polar bears, and I've been really fortunate and excited to do so. So my master's was in ecology, but focusing on the polar bears of Western Hudson Bay. And again, it takes all sorts of different skills. So if you're not super strong in one thing, you're probably super strong in another thing, and you can make that work. It is a lot of work to do what you want to do, but I think if you really love it, then it's really worth it. And I would encourage anyone to go for whatever it is that you want to learn about and study. I've met so many interesting people. The people I know that are working with polar bears come from backgrounds in the arts, in law. There's lawyers that are working on these issues. There's, chemists and mathematicians and communication specialists. So it's really, really neat. What would happen if you're able to build a device that could keep the ice from melting? That's a great question, and there's actually people working on that right now. I just read an article maybe last week, about people trying to refreeze the Arctic. Um, and I think those solutions are worth looking into. I think to combat climate change, we do need to do a combination of things. Number one is mitigation. We need to stop these emissions and switch to cleaner energies. We have to do that. That's number one. But I do think there is room for adaptation solutions. I mean, there's probably going to have to be. And so as far as I know, there are a couple groups working on ways to refreeze the Arctic or make more sea ice, and that would help. The issue, of course, is there's a lot of issues with expense, longevity of the project, whether the resulting ice is good enough that it could actually be a home to the organisms in the ecosystem that need it a certain way. And polar bears, they have some of the largest ranges out of any animal. So one polar bear's home range can be 500,000 square kilometers. They cover an insane amount of area. And so we would need like a lot of ice to keep a happy, healthy polar bear population. So it could be, I think it's worth looking into. Assuming all the polar bears will be gone in a century, what decade will be the most dangerous for them, do you think? Ooh, that's a really tough question. We're not really sure. If not absolutely nothing changes, we think we'll start seeing big things happening by about 2050, especially in Hudson Bay. The models show that about by 2050, 2060, Hudson Bay could be almost completely ice-free, and that would be a major turning point. But again, we really don't want to get to that point. We might be getting to the point where we've lost summer sea ice soon, but we think we'll keep winter sea ice around for a while. And places like the Canadian archipelago, where there's a lot more land, sea ice tends to stick around longer, so we hope that we can really keep that ice into the next century. There's so much guesswork, and we just want to try to stop the guesswork and just make the changes so we don't have to worry about these biggest things. And the biggest thing we can do to help polar bears, it's really a societal shift to different types of energy. And so wherever you live, no matter how old you are, there's little things we can do. We can all in our own homes save energy, buy less stuff, eat more locally, anything that's burning less fossil fuels. If you're able to, the thing is, it's hard. I think people need to be supported in this because we can't just upend everyone's lives. But it would be, great if more people were able to afford, better cars that were more efficient, and the government stepped in to help make solar more available for more people. Things like that is really the direction we need to go. But big community-wide changes are where we need to be at. It's not about individual actions anymore. It's about working together within our communities to really push leaders for change and push ourselves and just kind of get to a new normal. And a too small genetic population for polar bears? That's a great question. That's a question that you probably need to talk to a geneticist about. But for such a long-lived, slow reproducing animal, you'd still need quite a few polar bears, I think, to be as genetically diverse as we would want them to be. I don't have a hard answer for you because that's such a good question. I could reach out to one of my polar bear geneticist friends to ask. But we would really, you still want a few dozen polar bears at least, and even that I don't think would be enough. We do see the 19 different populations have slightly different genetics depending on where they are. And in an ideal world, we would keep all of that genetic diversity intact. Some zoos that do breed polar bears, especially in Europe, they do so with genetics in mind. So they try to mix up the genes as much as they can, which is really good. If you have to breed, then you should be breeding with genetic diversity in mind. And of course, that's, yeah, it's going to be a big issue moving forward as different populations of species shrink. We want to make sure we're keeping them diverse, we're keeping them happy, we're protecting them, and protecting them, especially with polar bears. Everything we're doing to protect them protects us as well, which is just really great. It's a win-win situation for what we can do positively for the bears. It's all good for all of us. So we're right at the hour now. So I can't thank you enough for listening to me talk about polar bears today. You guys had great questions. Super inspired seeing how many people are interested in the biodiversity, the science, the climate change issues. It's really wonderful. And yeah, I encourage you to check out our website, reach out to us if you have more questions. Check out Polar Bear Day on Monday. We're going to be answering questions all day long. It's going to be super fun. And anything you're doing for polar bears, if you tweet at us or anything, we will be sharing that around social media. So thank you so much, and have a great weekend. And thanks for helping polar bears, help us help polar bears. So thanks everybody. I'm going to shut her down now. Have a great weekend, and hopefully see you on Monday maybe. Thanks everybody. Thanks Deb for setting this up.